Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello and welcome to Homeschool Together. Thanks so much for joining us. If you have a chance, head down to the show notes to connect with us on social media and find our Gumroad account for all of our resource guides that we've been putting together. We're actively pushing on the rest of them and we're working our tails off, as well as all the links that we're going to be talking about today in our episode. Ariel, tell Jules Verne to take a knee. Tell Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman to get off the bikes. We just finished our around the world journey.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, so
it was, you know what? It was great. We, if you haven't followed our podcast yet, we've been doing an around the world journey with our kids with Torchlight Level K and Build Your Library Level 0. We combined the two.
We got our badge.
Yeah, we've been at it for
24,000 miles.
Yeah, I think it ended up taking us about a year and a half or
Year
so.
and a half to get around.
And maybe not quite that much, but about that. And we finished Antarctica and the Arctic this week, and that's it. That's a wrap. We're done.
If you're following on our YouTube channel, Antarctica will be coming out in our YouTube video probably in a couple weeks. We're just finishing up now. We wanted to record our review,
right?
But hopefully in the next couple of weeks, you'll see the last of the videos available
That's
on
right.
the YouTube channel.
We've done a video for every country or region that we have covered about all the books that we liked and the recipes we made, movies we watched, and videos and stuff. So we've done all of that.
This week was a penguin tartare that was on the menu. No.
So we're
very expensive.
We're gonna do some more videos. Just so for those of you that are watching those, we're gonna do videos about the different spines, the ones that the curriculum's recommended, the extra ones we added. We're gonna do book reviews about the chapter books. We've got a bunch more things coming for the YouTube channel that we're gonna go kind of into the weeds about the different things that we liked and didn't like and all that kind of stuff. But today we wanted to just give our final review summary of the two curriculums, what we liked about the combination, what we like about them separately. But before we get into that, I'd love to share with everybody what we're going to do for our celebration. So we've done the Around the World journey. We've had a great time. Our daughter loved it. So tomorrow we are doing a celebration day. So we're planning to, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we put out all the recipes that we've made over the last year and a half for all the different countries. And our daughter got to pick a whole day's worth of food. So we will be having French crepes for breakfast.
Yeah, Nutella and bananas.
Right. For
Yes.
lunch, we'll be having El Salvadorian bean and cheese pupusas and
So good.
and I think, tostones from fried plantains from Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. And then for snack in the afternoon, we're going to make homemade German pretzels.
Oh my gosh. And
for dinner, she wants Japanese garlic prawn udon noodles and shrimp and vegetable tempura. And for dessert, she wants not bannock bread. That's right. She chose arroz con pollo, arroz con leche from Mexico. Milk, rice pudding. Yeah, rice pudding milk, yeah. For dessert. I thought she was going to choose bannock bread. We were really surprised she didn't because she really, really loves bannock bread from Canada. But those are the recipes. So the whole day we're making all of her favorite foods from our journey. Mm-hmm. And for our celebration of the night, we're going to play Trekking the World, which is a board game. We'll review it on the podcast when we're done, but I'm really excited to play that. And I think we're going to try to maybe watch a movie that encompasses a journey. I don't think we
could watch the newest Jules Verne,
the newest 80
Jackie Chan.
Days around the world. So we're gonna look for a movie that kind of captures the globe. There's other ones too. There's like there's some nature ones, and there's also babies, which she talks about babies in all different countries. I don't know. We'll do something fun, but maybe we'll do the 80 days. But we've really loved it. So I wanted to tell you all what our celebration was going to be. So stay tuned onto the YouTube if you want to hear how it all goes.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the background. So we unified 2 curriculums. So what were those 2 curriculums, and kind of why did we choose to do that?
Okay. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this, Build Your Library Zero, it's a 36-week kindergarten curriculum. They listed as ages 4 to 6. So it covers...
And we agree, though. That's right about that.
I think that is right. I think that is correct. I think you could absolutely do it with a 4-year-old, and we are doing it. We started with a 5-year-old. Our daughter is now 6.5. And so I totally agree with that. It covers the countries by continent. So the very first thing that it does for each continent, it does a week of a continent overview. So it'll be a week of a Europe overview, and then each week after that will be in the same continent. It'll do like Northern Europe, and that's these group of countries, and then the British Isles, these group of countries, that kind of thing. So it goes continent by continent. It also includes animal and weather science as part of this journey. And then they have global studies inspired art with the book Global Art is the book that they use. So there's art projects that pertain to the countries. And then there's animal poetry, kind of that goes hand in hand with the animal science. There's the poetry component is animal poetry. So that's Build Your Library. Torchlight K. And Build Your Library, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, is a Charlotte Mason curriculum. So you can look up more about that. Torchlight is a Socratic method curriculum. And their kinder curriculum is also 36 weeks. They listed as ages 5 to 7. I think that's more accurate. They say that you can adjust it to expand it from ages 4 to 8. I call shenanigans on that, having done it. I really think
it's tough on the 4, maybe easier on the 8.
Yeah, I think that 5 is even a little bit tricky with it. I think 5 on some of the books is even pushing it. Definitely would not do it with 4. I think you could definitely go to 8, but even 5 feels a little bit.
Might be a stretch.
It was a little bit of a stretch. Our daughter was 5, and there were some things that I felt were a little bit much at the beginning.
At the beginning, yeah, and then she kind of grew into it. Yeah,
she grew into it, but I think that definitely it trends older. So rather than going continent by continent for the countries, it hops around. So the country, like I think the first week is like, I don't know, Russia, and the second week is Colombia, and I mean something like that. Like it hops indiscriminately between countries to keep things fresh, so you don't kind of get bogged down continent by continent. The science it incorporates is a book of science experiments and a series of chapter books called Zoe and Sassafras, which are about magical creatures but include a lot of elements of real scientific process, like how to test hypotheses and stuff like that. And then they have a character building component. So there's a couple of books that they include that are spines that are about character building throughout the whole 36 weeks. They do art, but it is not globally related art. It's just collage art. And they do include international music recommendations. There are also video recommendations in Torchlight, and they also do animal poetry. So that's kind of the basics about the 2 programs.
So one of the things, I know there's a community on Facebook. There's a Facebook community. Maybe we'll link that as well in the show notes, where people have combined this. Why are there so many people trying to combine these 2 curriculums? I mean, it seems like a lot of work. Why would they want to do that?
Yeah, and I think that part of the reason is that the 2 have very different book lists.
Yeah.
And both book lists are pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So I think, the reason we combine it is the same reason that a lot of people do, which is, boy, I really want to read all these books. I don't want to miss any of these books. Yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing for us is, and I think other parents probably feel similarly about this, 1 week per country or per region feels a bit fast, right? To say, we're going to do all the British Isles in 1 week.
It seems like
we did 3 weeks on the British Isles because it was so rich. So I feel like to just do it in 1 week, a lot of folks are thinking like, how can my kindergartner even hope to grasp what we're the sense of this area and of this culture in 5 days?
Well,
like
and
it just felt impossible.
Just in general, there's already kind of a squeeze on the time, but also like the availability, like the realistic the realistic expectations with respect to what the child is going to learn and remember about a certain given area. There's only so much they can, you can focus on, so many things you can do already, and to just jam more stuff into less time, it is a challenge.
Right. I mean, for us, by combining, we basically, instead of taking 1 week for a region, we took 2 weeks, and then we had more books. We did not only the books that the curriculums brought out, but we also got our own picture books to supplement. And that's what we go over in our videos. If you haven't seen them, we add extra books. So sometimes the books they recommended weren't at the library, or we didn't purchase them. And so we had to, make some adjustments. Make some alternatives. But yeah, I was really worried that if we went through this in 36 weeks as prescribed in one of the curriculums, even if we just did one of the single curriculums and we rushed through it, that our daughter would be so like overwhelmed by all the differences. Be like, 1 week we're here, next week we're there, we're doing this. And I felt like it would all be sensory overload for her.
I found from the standpoint of teaching, doing the plotting method continent by continent and then moving around the continent to various countries, it was way easier because you could constantly reinforce that here we are in the world. This is where we are learning about, and we are going to spend 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks in this one region.
Right.
Your kid could begin to get that kind of looping experience where they keep coming back to it and go, oh yeah, we're in South America. Yeah, we're in South America. Or we're in Europe, or we're in Africa. And they begin to kind of like focus on that. And then what's cool about that is, when you're combining these curriculums and you're doing the more plotting, I would recommend you to do the plotting slowly around the world, starting wherever, it doesn't matter, but start somewhere and then just work your way across the planet. It worked better. And I was able to, teach and really focus, especially with respect to a lot of the books and the content that was coming in. It was very focused to a region, and a lot of regions in you'll see a lot of commonalities in books and themes, in like if you're in like South America, you'll see a lot of the same type of themes, and they'll keep coming back and reinforcing. And I really, really think that's the better way to approach this. Yeah.
So I've heard people say that they like Torchlight and that it jumps around between countries because it keeps things fresh for their kids. But more often than not, I hear the opposite way, which is what we've done, which is go continent by continent. So for the mechanics of how we did the combination, we took the Build Your Library framework and we took that, each country they were going to go to, and then we tacked on the Torchlight week behind it. So if Build Your Library was doing a week on the British Isles, we tacked on the UK from... And
you did some really nice
Torchlight
spreadsheet work where you were able to break that up.
Right. So I did a spreadsheet where I had all of these weeks broken up, and I sorted in the correct Torchlight weeks after the proper Build Your Library weeks. The problem gets to be the chapter books, because there are picture books for every week. That's easy. But the chapter books sometimes span multi-weeks because of their length. So what I did was I took the chapter books and I moved them so that chapter books that pertained to a specific country or region stayed with it, but other ones that didn't, that were just, a fun book that's at kindergarten level, I could move that wherever I wanted to. So there was some adjustment. So if you haven't heard before and you're going to think about doing this combination, if you want to PM me or email me your proofs of purchase of both curriculums, I will happily share my spreadsheet with you and probably save you lots of time if you want to do this combination. So I do want to throw that out there. If you want to send me your proofs, I will send you that schedule.
And the email is in the show notes below.
Right.
So let's, that's kind of like what we did, how we did it. Let's talk a little bit about the review. Let's first start with the combination. Like, we talked a little bit about like what we liked about that and what we do. What are the things we didn't like about that? So what did we like?
So I loved that there was room to breathe. I really did. Yeah. I think that doing 1 week on a country would be... there were a couple times where we did do only a week because we we needed to crunch something, or because it was not really covered in Build Your Library and it was only covered in Torchlight. So like Ecuador, for example, there wasn't anything on Ecuador specifically in Build Your Library, but they had a week on it in Torchlight. So we just did a week. Sometimes it works, but I think more often than not, I found that doing a multi-week study was more enjoyable for us all. It gave us the time to breathe. It also gave us the time to pull in a lot more books and watch more videos and watch a movie that went with it and make a recipe. If we were trying to do a week a country and I wanted to make a recipe and we wanted to try to fit in a movie, that's kind of a lot in, just a few days to try to find. You're probably not doing both those things on the same night.
Well, and
that kind of thing.
And life happens, right? So you get busy, maybe something happens, or school gets canceled because of a snowstorm, or you can't get out to get your books this week, and they languish on the hold shelf at the library. Whatever it might be, having that little bit extra time for us proved to be kind of that. You give yourself a little bit of a grace period on some of these weeks.
Sometimes we would do, it wouldn't be a full 2 weeks, it'd be a week and a half because we were getting back from a vacation or something. Exactly. And we were like, okay, we'll just do this in a week and a half.
I can't tell you how many week and a half studies we had.
We did a lot of week and a hals. And so I liked the room to breathe. I think that
it does require you to start a little earlier. Maybe that might be a con for some people. We started with the Torchlight curriculum as our first thing that we did homeschooling wise.
Yeah, Torchlight pre-K.
Pre-K. And then we did the Blossom and Root Early Learners Volume 2. Yep. And then we started this. And, we've been on this for a long time.
Right. I mean, there is a length component here. Now, we homeschool year round. So for us, the fact that we were basically doubling this experience, and it wasn't quite doubling because there's some of it that, we were able to, because Build Your Library does these overview weeks, some of them, we just kind of folded in, and it didn't take us quite a full 72 weeks. But we were able to just go, it's cool. We're not going to be done with this in a year, and that's fine. And we're living with it. And it didn't bother us that we might be going into first grade, with still having been on this curriculum and not moving on to the next thing. So that was okay for us, but maybe that's not for you. I think the other thing about it is that there definitely travel fatigue set in for all of us.
Absolutely.
That by the end we were all kind of ready to, get on to something else. Like, our goal for this was to just, it's not for her to remember facts and figures. It's not for her to know a great deal about all the geography and animals of all these places.
Capitals of every country.
Yeah, it was more about just cultural exposure, right? Yep. It's kindergarten. We wanted her to know that the world is a big place. It's made up of lots of different people and lots of different animals and lots of different landscapes and many different types of cultures and ways that people live. And, the world's a big and interesting place, and it's bigger than our little town. That's kind of all we needed her to know, to appreciate that, there's people that live all over the world and they live in different ways, and there's cool different animals, and just kind of broaden her horizons. And I think, unequivocally, she got that this year.
I think that was the big thing, especially I think in the last half, when she started to mature a little bit more into being a kindergartner and a little bit older kid. I think at the beginning it was really just fun reading all these books and doing things. But I think she started to appreciate a little bit more towards the end what we were doing and where she was going and what she was experiencing. And because it took so long, we had those type of developmental changes along the way because we were doing it for a year and a half. But you're right. I think the immersion, the experience, I think bringing in the kitchen, a lot of the cooking was a nice way to do that as well. Tasting the flavors of regions, experiencing that. We've also been doing our yum box, Universal Yums.
Universal Yums,
along the whole way. We've loved
doing that.
We've loved that. We recommend that. We're not paid to say that, but we've been doing it every single month for the last, I think since before we started doing the Around the World journey, and that has been a really wonderful treat. And it's hard to align.
Yeah, you can't really align them because you don't know what's coming.
Yeah, you don't know what's coming and what country you're getting your snacks from. But it's a great experience to just reinforce what you're doing. what were the things that we didn't like?
Yeah, so it's definitely
We talked about fatigue.
the fatigue at the end. It got to be kind of long in the tooth.
Yeah, it did.
So the other thing is,
It finished strong though with Antarctica.
and
Australia and Oceania, and then Antarctica. I think was
it's-
a good finish.
Everything has been fun. It's just been like, I think we've all been kind of ready to do something else.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that I didn't like is that sometimes that area that we were studying wasn't really exciting enough for our daughter to really spend 2 weeks on it. So if she just wasn't into a certain country and we'd planned 2 weeks on it, she was like, she kind of got bored with the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. So
She wasn't like you'll see it in the sense that we saw it in the way that she wouldn't ask like, oh, what are we reading today, or what videos are we watching about this
Right.
country. She'd just be like, okay, Daddy, can I go do this other thing? It wouldn't really be in her mind.
right. And there were some countries that we were excited to study that we thought she would be into, and she was kind of like, meh.
Yeah.
So when that happened too, then it was like
by the
2
time we
weeks felt like a really long
Yeah.
time to spend on a country that your kid is not into, in which case sometimes we exited early
And that's
and went on to something else.
And that's an okay thing to do. If you're doing this, you can bail on certain areas.
Absolutely. So the last thing is that obviously, taking one of these curriculums at face value and just doing what it says to do is the easiest possible path. So to do this combination is complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
I not only did I make the spreadsheet, I then set up binders for every continent, and I printed out both curriculums, and I put the curriculums together in the proper order that we would be doing, and I crossed out the chapter books and I wrote the new chapter books we'd be doing for each one of them, so that I basically had a compiled curriculum, and we'll do a YouTube video and I'll show those.
Yeah.
But basically I did that, and every time that we turned a corner, we couldn't just like open the book and do what came next, because there was always some weird caveat to it.
Yeah, right.
Of course, we added in alternate spines and we did other things that made it our own.
Yeah, we
and
had
all
like
that stuff adds complexity.
We had about a dozen spines that we were adding in.
Yeah, we
along
had
the
a
way,
bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So, and I'm happy we did. I'm not saying that, but one of the cons to doing this is that it is more complex and there is more planning involved. I tended to plan about a month ahead and leave the rest. I knew the general sequence of the whole thing, but as far as planning the actual weeks and what we were going to do specifically, I only planned a few weeks ahead just because it made the planning load easier on me. And I planned most of it in Trello. We have a video on YouTube, but Matt will link in the show notes about how we planned it. So yeah, I think just the complexity, the doing 2 weeks meant it went a lot longer, which, got a little bit, we were a little bit fatigued at the end. And sometimes taking 2 weeks for a country was a bit much if she just wasn't digging it.
So that's our pros and cons of the combination. Let's get in a little bit more granularity. If you're listening and you're thinking about doing this curriculum coming forward, and you don't know if you want to do the combination, but you're interested in the Build Your Library one, and you're also interested in the Torchlight one, let's talk a little bit about each curriculum individually. So let's talk about Build Your Library first. So like, what are the things we liked the most?
With only a couple of exceptions, this was a very high quality book list.
Yeah, it was.
The books were great. Not all new books. Some of them are classics that are there, but all very well received by our learner and ourselves. So, really good book list. I was impressed that, there's picture books and then there's also chapter books. There's literature. All the literature in Build Your Library pertained to the country or region we were reading about.
That was nice.
It all went with it, which you'd think, of course it should, but wait, we'll get to it with Torchlight. So I really liked that. I think continent by continent was a very logical sequence. It helped our kid to get rooted in it. I think if we had hopped between continents, between countries all over the world, it would have been a whirlwind for her. And I don't think she would have had any real sense of where she was. We have our globe. We were using our globe to say...
We have a giant wall map as well.
Right. And so we could kind of say like, hey, we're going to this whole area. See where we are? See where this is? And she could kind of get a sense of it. The other thing that I like about continent by continent is she started to get a flavor of things. Like we started, when we started into the first countries of South America, and then you were like building and building and building. Oftentimes with a continent, the different countries in that continent they all have their own unique culture, but there are some similarities of culture, and there's similarities of geography and animals and language, and so there's a bunch of things there that are common. And I think when you go to a continent and you get to really immerse and explore that, it became richer for her, and she gained more meaning out of the different countries. So I like that Build Your Library does continent by continent. I really feel like that's the right thing to do. I also like that they have a continent overview week as the very first week of each new continent. So it's like hey, let's get to know Europe as a general.
That's cool too, because we had some of our spines that enabled that, and if we have a few overview books that we have that we're doing summaries of the various continents before they jumped into the country. So we actually had some spines that actually fed into that.
Exactly.
But I always found that those weeks tended to be a little thin. So if you wanted to use them as, you don't have to spend a whole week. You might only have to spend 2 or 3 days on that. Especially if you wanted to kind of combine that with maybe if you're doing your planning and you have like a week where it's like, oh, this isn't really a week, but it's too little for 1 week, but too much for 2 weeks. If you combine it with the continent overview at the beginning of that, you can do 2 weeks.
We did a lot of that too.
I always, like at the beginning, I was using those continent overviews as kind of like a breather week.
Yeah. and I think that's a good way to go.
Yeah, it wasn't like a lot of work to do those weeks.
Right.
Not a lot of books to read, just a few spines. You could always catch up on other things or use them to do some science or do something else.
It's a nice way too. There's oftentimes books and different videos or documentaries that talk about the entire continent and don't just focus on a country. So that's a good time to do something like that too. So I like the overview weeks.
Also, Build Your Library had all the books available at the library.
Basically all the books, not every single one of them.
We rarely ran into any conflicts. And
yeah, I think that, well, okay. So here's one thing about combining, I would say, or even, combining or doing them individually, whatever you do, don't start, if you're going to use your local library, do not start one of these curriculums in August, early September, because you're going to be fighting over books at the library. So, there's just enough people around you that are doing this. Exactly. So with the combination, I found that we were never aligning basically with anybody else. Or if you're going to do one of these in single, you might start with a different, start with a different continent, or don't start in August, September, start earlier in the summer or something. Set yourself off of that normal school year track, because you're going to have an easier time at the library. So yeah, you're right. Build Your Library had almost all the books available at the library. We did choose to buy quite a few of them, but we didn't have to. They were really at the library. The other thing about Build Your Library is that the way that it's set up, you have a week overview grid. So it's done as a grid of all the different books and what you're going to read in the different days. And then it has a page for every day. And it's like, Monday, you're going to read this page of this book, and you're going to do this of this book, and here's a discussion question for that chapter. And while you're reading that, you might be learning about this. Here's a video that might be something you might look into, and we're going to do this art thing. And you can basically go through, and it has scripted your day for you and given you the discussion questions and all that stuff. So if you really like a curriculum that gives you like a lot of hand holding, Build Your Library is great for that, because it really tells you step by step, do this, say this, here's what you might want to look into if you want to add some extra learning. Very, very prescriptive. And
really helpful if this is your first curriculum that you're going through. We had the luxury of doing a few ahead of this, but if you're deciding to homeschool and this is the first time you're going to homeschool, the Build Your Library, taking you through day by day, step by step, telling you, I can't tell you, from my own experience, just being able to say, what page is that on? And it's like, oh, page 55 through 56, read this section. And just having that, not having to thumb through and figure out what you're reading, having that kind of given to you is really, really, it takes a little bit of that weight off your shoulders. And if you think about it, if you're doing, whether you're just doing the Build Your Library alone or you're doing a combo, just having that taken away from you, that 30 seconds of searching, because if you think about that, you're going to do that 7 or 8 times a week. And you're going to do that for 36 weeks. Having that information just there prescribed step by step it's going to save you hours and hours and hours at the back end of this, having to find everything and search for everything. It's really helpful to have that kind of laid out in a grid format like that.
I think it's true. I really like too that there are discussion questions, because when you're reading through your chapter book and you're just like, oh, you're reading chapter 1 of the very, very far north. Here's what we're going to talk about. Why do you think Dwayne did this and this and that? You know, I'm not saying I couldn't come up with discussion questions, but the fact that they're written down is pretty darn nice.
But you do it long enough, you actually start to put that internally into you. And so maybe you don't need to necessarily know that discussion question, but it teaches you to ask those stimulating questions to your reader to kind of get that reading comprehension back. Just teaching you how to do that. And again, if this is your first time, it's really helpful to have that. By the end, you're kind of naturally doing that, and you maybe don't need it as much. And I think as you go through the curriculum, I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but you're going to add and drop things along the way, because what fits your learner, what fits your schedule, what fits your sensibilities is different, and not everything works. So, but learning how to ask those questions, I think, is really good.
So the other thing I like about it is I like the animal science. I think that as far as science goes in kindergarten, the animals, it's great because it connects with the different regions that you're going to be studying, and animals is something kids like. And at the end of there's activity pages that are at the end of Build Your Library, and basically your weekly assignment for the whole thing is to be doing this animal research pages. So each time you're in a country or a region, you're supposed to be choosing an animal, drawing a little picture, writing a little bit about the animal that you've learned. I think that is, we had to, obviously, our kindergartner dictated to us, and we wrote some of it early on, and then she was able to write later. But I think that's like the perfect level of science for kinder. I don't think that I think it just dovetailed really well. So I liked that.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're just focusing on the animals, I think is basically the best type of science you could do for that level.
I think so.
I don't know if you're going to be teaching the periodic table at that
level. No. And I think it goes well with the around the world study. So I think it aligns nicely.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about things we didn't like. Ariel, I don't like folktales. You don't like folktales.
So we don't
like folktales.
As a family, and your family, your mileage may vary on this, yes. But we don't really dig folktales in general, because folktale stories tend to be sometimes they tend to be oddly constructed. They have kind of weird narrative flow. They don't make a lot of sense. And our daughter's super logical. She's like, wait a minute, why would they do this? That's not smart, or that doesn't make any sense. Like, if you've got one of those analytical type kids, folktales are hard. Sometimes there's disturbing stuff in them too, which that leaves you kind of in unsettled ways. So we're not super huge folktale fans. So when I said earlier, with the exception of a few books, I think that the book list is very high. Folktales is what I'm talking about here. And I would say that if you're interested in Build Your Library, and Torchlight's got some of these too. So Torchlight's got a year full of stories, and Build Your Library has a year full of animal stories. Yeah. Both of those books, or anything that looks folktale-y, I would suggest getting that from the library and previewing that book before you buy it, because those are spines, and we bought those spines, and we will be selling those spines because they just, for our family, we just didn't connect with it. Some people love folktales, and that's totally their jam.
If you're looking for some folktale books, we'll have links in the show notes below.
No. So, that's totally some people's jam, and I get that. But for us, just it wasn't our thing. So that we didn't like that.
And some weeks had chapter books, some weeks had picture books. So, that's kind of a little off.
For me to say, oh, hey, we're going to read this one picture book. Oh, read it 3 times. Like, my daughter does not want to reread this one short chapter book like a bunch of times.
Some kids may like that.
But maybe some kids do. Our daughter loves to be read a plethora of picture books, during the day. And then she and I have a chapter book we're reading at night. And she really got into all the chapter books from Build Your Library. So I was a little bit bummed that some weeks didn't have a literature selection.
Yeah, but
they only had picture books.
So
only like 1 or 2.
One of the things that we were doing along the way is we were getting the huge dump from the library of any book from that region or that country, because we were doing the around the world videos. So we wanted to review additional books as well.
Right. Because sometimes you can't find the one book that they list in the curriculum. They're like, well, do I spend $10 to buy a picture book?
Yeah.
Or maybe there's an equally good picture book substitute. We tended to either buy all of the chapter books basically because I wanted to know we could have them. That's a multi-week thing. But for picture books, I really didn't want to have to own all the picture books. No. We did buy a few of them, but in general, it's why we did those videos. So you can find something different if your library doesn't have what you're looking for. So yeah, I was kind of bummed that sometimes they didn't have a chapter.
Well, and then pairing on to that, sometimes you would like to have some additional selections or options that maybe were recommended to you in case that book wasn't available.
Right. And so at the beginning of Build Your Library, she does give you alternate recommendations for each country. And there's like 3 or 4 books or something that she does. We're book people. I would love to see, I want to see 10 or plus books that we could look at. And, you don't have to pick all of them, but I wanted a little bit more on the book recommendations, which is why we did the videos. So see our videos and our resource guides. We made resource guides for every country with books and videos and recipes and movies and documentaries and games, because what we really wanted was a whole bunch more information that we could then, make some more decisions if we wanted to go for a deeper study.
So beyond that, what are the things that we subbed in? Sometimes things don't work. Sometimes, we don't like the books that they have recommended, or they're just not working for us. Were there things that we subbed in?
Yeah. So the main one for Build Your Library was we did not use the global art book. I took a look at it from the library, and there was a couple of art projects in there of the ones I looked through that gave me pause. Anything that requires phone wire to be done. I just, we're more of a paper crafts type of family.
We are.
We are a low preparation type of crafting family. If it doesn't include like paper and, paper bags, paper plates, popsicle sticks, paint, glue, crayons, we're very simple crafters. So I went ahead and got the Around the World Art and Activities book, which is from the older edition of Build Your Library 0 before she did the 2020 update. And the book is out of print. So I went ahead and just bought it used. I got it for like $6. I really liked that because it was all paper crafts. And I feel like paper crafts are very kindergarten. The global art book, while they looked neat, definitely required a lot of forethought and materials. So for us, the art and activities book Around the World was just the perfect level of kindergarten. Let's make a Statue of Liberty out of a paper bag and a toilet paper roll. It was that kind of thing.
It's stuff that if you have an art caddy like we have, that's filled with the basics like scissors and paper and glue and hole punches and things of that nature, crayons and markers, you can do almost any one of these activities. Right. And for me, again, going back to that kind of we talked a little bit about earlier, the time aspect, if you're having to spend 10, 15 minutes to set up for an art thing that they're going to only spend 10 minutes on, and you do that.
And need a trip to the store to buy supplies.
Yeah, exactly. And then you do that 36 straight weeks. I mean, think about how many hours you're wasting just setting up things. So having something that is a little bit more teacher friendly,
yes,
with respect to your time, and something you can set up like, oh, while they're doing this activity or watching this video, you can set it up. Something that's a little bit easier, I think, is a lot more helpful. As well as you don't have to run to the store, the Michaels every week to get 50 different things and spend $80 a week on doing crafts. It's sort of like that. Like, hey, let's make Indian food this week, and I'm really feeling like tikka masala. And it's like, okay, now we spent $80 and get all the ingredients, and you're like, wow, I could have just gone to the Indian store, restaurant, and gotten the food, right? That's
true.
One of those type of things. We don't want to run into the $78 tomato problem that we tend to run into. So
it was true, and the other book that we subbed was the Atlas for Build Your Library. We didn't feel like that atlas was any specific. We got the wild animal atlas, which is good because it goes with the science. But we just use the Smithsonian Children's Atlas that Torchlight had. I really think you could sub just about any children's atlas, and you would be fine.
Yep.
FYI.
Absolutely. So that was Build Your Library. Let's head into Torchlight. What were the things that we liked about it?
So there was a really wide book list, and the books are all new and cool, and they were so appealing.
They were hip.
There was a lot of included books. There was a lot of picture books. There was a ton of literature books, heavy, lengthy literature books. Yeah. And there was in the curriculum they give like another 7 or 8 book recommendations, and they give an older learner book recommendation too. They also include in the curriculum recommendations for videos and for music, which I thought was really great. Just explicitly called out. Build Your Library does give those occasionally sprinkled in throughout the it's day, whatever. Oh, you might want to check out a video about this. Occasionally they do that, but this had it as a part of every section was on the videos and the music. So I thought that was really good.
And they did more of a checklist instead of the day by day.
Yeah. So,
in some respects, that can be easier, especially if you are that mentality that you like to just check things off. I'm sort of like that. I like to just take things off the top. A lot of times when I'm doing homeschooling, I can't do what they want me to do on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. I had the parent partnership and I got sports.
Right.
Monday and Friday tend to be my big days. So if you could just give me a list of the things I got to do.
Yeah, that is nice.
And I can just go check. And I can just run through it. It'll take me an hour and a half. And I can just, read an ocean of books. We can watch a couple videos and we can talk about stuff and do some art activities. And I can do 3 days worth of work in one day.
Right.
And that's not out of the question for me.
And I guess this is a good point to say that we did that often where we would...
That was my schedule for a long time.
We would have only a couple of days a week where we would focus on reading all of the books and doing the art activities. And then the other days of that week, we would do videos, movie, a recipe, and that would be the way we were connecting. But as far as the heavy lifting of the books, we would really just do them on a couple of days.
It was a Monday, Friday thing for me mostly. And then I would just pick it. We always had a lot of books. We always had 20 or 30 children's books to read, way beyond what was on the
over
list.
that 2-week period.
Yeah, it was a combination of the two and then some. And so I found myself reading 8 or 9 or 10 on Monday, 8 or 9 or 10 on Friday, and then I would just read a couple through the week.
Yeah, and we would watch videos and things too.
Yeah, we would load them in. So now let's talk a little bit about what we didn't like. So what were the things?
Many of so there's picture books and there's literature books. Many of the literature books did not pertain in any way to a region or country of the world. They were just a book that was a kindergarten book. And we liked many of them. Mercy Watson's a great example. It's a really cute series about a pig. We loved them, but they didn't pertain in any way to the regions. I think that you're reading one of the Mercy Watson books in the week you're doing Russia. So, I think it's kind of a mixed bag there for me because we liked those books, but they didn't pertain at all. I kind of wish that they
It's almost like they chose quality over applicability.
Yeah, whereas I really appreciated that Build Your Library went with a quality book that was also applicable.
Yeah.
I kind of wish that Torchlight would have just had a list of all of the literature books and would have just said, hey, throughout the year, these are some great books for kindergartners. Read them at your leisure. But the fact that they had to line them up by week with things that they didn't pertain to, I just kind of found a little bit irksome because I was, looking to dive into and I remember our daughter being like, Mommy, what is this? We read a book today, Ivy, and as we were finishing Antarctica this week, and this was our last day, and we finished it. And she was like, but I never figured out how that went with Antarctica. And I go, oh no, baby, it wasn't supposed to. It was just, and she goes, oh, well, it was a good book, So I kind of would have wanted them to just put a list at the beginning and said, hey, here's some great kindergarten books. Read these when you can.
Yeah, right.
But pairing them up with weeks was very pointless in my opinion. So there's a character building module in this, which uses the spine was Molly and Keela.
Yeah, Molly and Keela.
And it was boring, and the morals were so obvious.
The stories were 25% too long, and they had this kind of looping nature in the way they told the story, and you just kind of they're just solving these problems, and they're just so obviously
and they're so heavy-handed.
They were really, and
the
then
morals are ugh.
And you read the story, and they weren't very good, and then at the end you have a dozen questions at the end where you're just wow, you're reading way more into this story than I thought.
Yeah, I get what they were trying to go for, but
Yeah.
man, that book was a total flop for us.
We ended up bailing on it, I think, sometime in South America.
Thank goodness I did not buy that book. We just got it from the library and we were like, this is terrible. Our kids saw right through it. Like there was no, it was almost like,
It's funny because a lot of times
it was almost like curriculum. It felt like curriculum.
it felt more like us. Yeah, it felt more schooly. But the thing that I always laughed about is that a lot of times the children's books that we were reading, just the regular picture books, had great moral tales and great learning about virtues and whatnot, and we didn't need that thing, right? You didn't need that.
We didn't need that. All the other really rich children's books had great messaging and things. Yeah, I agree. I thought that part was not necessary. Part of the problem with Torchlight is while those books are snazzy and very appealing, they're so new that a lot of them aren't at the library. So you really have to decide, one, if you have a great library system, and we do have a very good library system here outside Seattle. It is very good. And even our library didn't have some of these books. If you have a smaller library, you're going to have to buy most of these books, or you're going to have to sub and do something different, which kind of defeats part of the purpose of Torchlight if you have to sub the books, because the books is really the shining star of Torchlight, is how cool these picture books are. So if you have to choose different ones, like what's the point? So, just know if you have a very small library system or no access to a library, if you're at a foreign service station or something, you're going to have to buy all the books. And they're going to be more expensive. Whereas the Build Your Library books, if you are in a foreign location or somewhere where you're going to have to buy them anyways, they're going to be cheaper because most of the books are slightly older and, you can get them used. So the other thing that I didn't care for with Torchlight is that the art didn't pertain to the country or region in any way. So it was just collage art. We did it for a couple weeks and then we were like, eh. So we just tossed that. We didn't do it for the rest of the time.
Yeah.
So we talked about the Build Your Library,
the animal study,
the animal research pages. That was their kind of overarching project through the whole thing. Torchlight had these Torchlight Trek articles where you're supposed to write about a famous person, or I think it was a place or an event maybe. I am vaguely remembering it because it was way too advanced for a kindergartner and our kindergartner did not do it. No. So we tried to do one and realized oh my goodness, this is more like a second grade business. So that was really kind of a bummer because their whole, overarching project was not really doable.
It was going to require a lot of heavy hand on your side.
Okay, that's probably more accurate. A kindergartner could do this, but you're going to have to do a lot of the guiding, you're going to do all the writing. It was something that would have required a ton of hand holding, which if we have to hold hands that much, I just feel like that's just more work we don't need. So, you could do it, but I don't think that it was an appropriate level for kinder.
And applying that as well as some of the complexity with the chapter books and the literature selection, it's not necessarily for those, on the younger skew of
that 4 to 5.
Yeah, 4 or 5 range. I don't know if it's a very good thing. Like the books, the children's books, the books that they recommend, those picture books, okay, fine.
The picture books are good, but some of the chapter
books were a little bit longer. And I know everybody's listening, what we're about to say. It's the font size, right? It's that font size difference between, say, a Magic Treehouse book and say what's the Race to the Wild book?
Yeah.
Like you and I know, there's I think a 2-point font difference between the two.
And how many pictures, right?
Yeah. And you can easily know that okay, that book's a lot more challenging because the chapters are longer. There's way more reading. It's going to take longer to get through. Versus something like a Magic Treehouse book where you can sit down and 30 minutes you can read the entire book.
I really, what I'm looking for in a kindergarten chapter book is a book that reads.
Things like this matter because again, it's the amount of time you're having to put into this. Right.
Well, and it's
especially if you're combining these curriculums.
It's the comprehension too of your kids. I'm looking for a kindergarten book to be quick through the chapters. Yeah. I'm looking for it to have occasional drawings. It doesn't have to have a drawing on every page clearly, but every few pages in a kindergarten chapter book, I would like for there to be some sort of a line sketch or something. There were some books for Torchlight that were 3-week reads.
They were pretty long.
They were very long.
Were they the Missy Piggle ones?
Missy Piggle Wiggles were 3-week reads.
that's
Tum Tum and Nutmeg was also like a 3-week read.
Tum Tum and Nutmeg.
That was very long.
It was like 3 or 4 novellas in that one book, right? That you had.
Yeah, that book was huge. We didn't even get through the whole book, and it was good.
Yeah, Missy Piggle was really good, but it's a legit 300-page book. Like you're, and it's not. I mean, I'm not talking about like paperback, throwaway paperback type of font size where it's 80,000 words. I mean, they're probably 50,000 words, but I mean, you're talking spending 7-8 hours reading a book to your kid, and that's a big investment, especially with like the length of the story.
Right.
The Missy Piggle Wiggle was really just, at some point, it was a loose collection of short stories.
And several of the books that were chosen for Torchlight were Tum Tum and Nutmeg. Same, it was different short stories. I mean, we really liked them. Again,
was there a general arc across those short stories? I didn't read Tum Tum.
Yeah, there was an arc, and I liked it. And Tum Tum and Nutmeg was great.
Missy Piggle Wiggle had that as well. But it felt like every chapter was like, oh, here's a new kid who has a problem, and here comes Missy Piggle Wiggle to fix it. But, through all those chapters, there were references to this larger story arc that was occurring over the top of it. So
I got to say, I liked the books. I'm not saying that I didn't, and our daughter really enjoyed them. But like I said, I would have really enjoyed a giant book list and just said, hey, go through these at your leisure this year. And we would have, because what we ended up doing was sometimes we waited to start the next chapter book until we were at that week. Like if we finished the other chapter book early, we wouldn't just start the next one. And I kind of wish at some point we started doing that, but early on we didn't. And we kind of lost ground there.
And I mean, let's be honest, you're sitting there and you got this huge crate of books. You got 2 weeks to go through them all. The kids' picture books are really good. And then you have your, the way we stacked them, we had our literature selection right up front. And you're like, wow, I could grab the 300-page Missy Piggle Wiggle, or I can grab the 70-page Magic Treehouse book, and then the 80-page Greetings from Somewhere, and then the 2 other books. And those are all shorter than this one book. And there were a few weeks where we just flat out didn't get to it.
We got to part of it, or we read it later. I mean, we're catching up on a couple of the chapter books.
Yeah, we're still reading right now.
Yeah, we're still reading a few of the chapter books that didn't have any country pertinence. And so before we're going to get through all of them so we can record reviews for YouTube about the different chapter books. But so look for that. But in basic, I would have rather a giant list and said, these are great books for kindergartners. Read through these when you get to it, because they didn't have anything to do with it. The last thing that I would say about Torchlight was the science was random. Oh, yeah. So the science was a 6-book series of Zoe and Sassafras, which we talked about. Our daughter absolutely loved them. I think that they were great as far as introducing scientific concepts of scientific process, of how to experiment and how to think logically and that kind of thing. But the science experiment books, it was Big Science for Little People or something.
There were some good science in there.
They were just random experiments, though. They had no pertinence to the country. They didn't have a lot of background as to why that science worked. It was flashy experiments.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this in the Evan Moore STEM book, where they folded in multiple experiments and ideas under an overarching concept, whether it's like the physical sciences or the natural sciences or, whatever that might be. Like, okay, here's a bunch of stuff that pertains to nature, and we're going to do 3 or 4 experiments that pertain to nature, right? There has to be some governing principle, very similar to the argument that we said regarding, when you're covering a bunch of countries, if you can stay within that continent, it helps to reinforce what you're learning. Same idea here with respect to science is that if you're going to be teaching a bunch of scientific principles or doing a bunch of experiments, it's great to do an experiment. And so in that experiment, you as a teacher can tell your student, remember what we did last week? This pertains to that same idea of, I don't know, gravity, right? We're doing various gravity experiments, or we're doing things that pertain to friction or whatever it might be, right? We can do multiple things, and they all feed into a larger concept or a larger idea or theme. These were just experiments, and it was the learner does them. It's fun. It's exciting. They don't even know they're doing science.
Yeah. Oh, we did water in a plastic bag, and we poked there's a pencil through it, and it doesn't leak.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, okay, that's cool. It's almost like a magic trick. She's not getting, I didn't feel like she was really getting anything out of it or building anything cohesive. At least with the animal science, I felt that she learned and she retained some of that. So
Exactly. Okay, so that was
off my soapbox about science.
That's Build Your Library. That was Torchlight. We kind of broke down both of them, what we did, what we didn't like. And listen, when we say we don't like things, that's fine. Doesn't mean we didn't like the curriculum or anything. We're just being critical about everything we do.
Right. We're just trying to give all of the information.
All the information.
In general, I think they were both great.
Good.
And either one I think is good. But
let's get down to the bottom line. If you only had to do one, which one would you do?
I would do Build Your Library.
I would do it as well.
It is an easy, open and go, day by day instruction. And then I would add the Torchlight books as you need or want to, if you want to add extra. So that would be my advice. If you can only do one, you don't want a combo, you don't want to worry about it, I would recommend Build Your Library.
Yep. So combining 2 weeks for each.
So yeah, I think that combining 2 weeks for each is a bit of overkill if your learner isn't interested in that area. So what our recommendation is maybe do some continent overviews with your learner before you start, or maybe you want to do that, when you get to the new continent, when you do that overview week. I mean, figure out how you want to do this, but I would find a way to give your learner some sort of overview that you can then determine their level of interest in different areas and decide to spend more time there and less on the areas that they're not super into, because they're naturally going to, enjoy it more if they're interested. And don't be afraid to bundle regions together if your learner's just not that into it. We kind of felt like, because we wanted to be comprehensive for our daughter, but also we wanted to be comprehensive for all of you. We didn't want to skip anything.
Yeah, right.
We didn't want to be like, well, she wasn't that into Southeast Asia, so we just didn't do it. But I don't think you should be afraid to skip something if your kid's just not into it.
Exactly. And some of these recommendations is, as we were going through this curriculum and we were just talking between the two of us, we've got a 3-year-old who's coming up. And she's going to do this thing.
We're going to do this again.
And we kept asking ourselves the question of, okay, we're doing this comprehensive thing for our oldest and for, other ancillary reasons. But when we get our 3-year-old and she's 5 and she starts this thing, what would we want you to know?
How would we
do this differently with our kid at the second time around?
Right. And so, we'll talk about the very end, what our plan is for our next go around based on where we're at now. I am glad that we did what we did, because we gained an incredible amount of knowledge as a family. But our advice would be, maybe you don't want to do 2 weeks for everything if your kid's just not that interested. If you're thinking about combining.
How about the people out there who have, some heritage, they're from a different country, maybe they have some, the immigrant story or something of that nature, that they have a lot of connection to a certain region of the world. What should they do there?
Yeah, I think that we found time and again that when our daughter had some sort of personal connection to an area,
or even a friend at school who is from a certain area.
It could be your
or
own,
like your coworker.
Right. I have several coworkers from India. Our daughter was so into studying India because she knew that I worked with women from India, and she wanted me to ask them questions, and she wanted to learn how they tie their saris, and she wanted to eat the food and just different stuff, right? She was all into it. So if you've got family heritage in a country, if you have an upcoming trip, or you have taken a trip, we took a trip, several trips around to different countries in Europe, and we went to Iceland at one point. So when we studied Northern Europe and stuff, we were able to show her pictures of our trip to Iceland, and the connection that she made to that was so much deeper. So if you got a trip planned or a trip you've already taken, you work with somebody, you're friends with somebody, you got a family connection or heritage or whatever, really lean into that and leverage where you can, because we found that the deepest, most engaged learning.
Spend an extra week there.
Right. For us, we have a lot of family history in the British Isles. We spent 3 weeks in the British Isles. I think I'd do it again. There was so much to cover.
Spend a little bit more time in Spain, because we actually took our daughter, our oldest, to Spain when she was 1.5. She doesn't remember it, but we were able to pull up those pictures.
Right. We spent more time studying that. And so if you've got some way to personalize this, leverage it and find a way to personalize it is our recommendation.
Now, they're out there. They get that week. They're staring down the barrel of, some country.
Some country nobody's interested in.
Yeah, whoever that is. We're not going to single out anybody.
No. It could be anything.
Could be any reason for any reason
We had
whatsoever.
ones that, I was like really excited to do France with our daughter because, I studied French in school and I've always had a special place in my heart for France, and I've been to France several times. And she was kind of like, I
want the crepes.
Yeah, she wanted the crepes and then not a whole lot else, right? Like she was interested in Paris a little bit. So look, if your kid's not into it, don't force it, is what we would say. Yeah. It's okay. We think it's okay to skip something if you're not that into it, because your child is not going to remember all the places. If you skipped France, they're not going to remember that anyway. The whole point of this entire thing is not for them to remember every country and all these facts, but for them to have a global appreciation that the world is a big place with lots of different people in it, and understanding people live their lives differently and eat differently and different climates and all that kind of stuff.
It's about immersion.
Yeah. So don't be hard on yourself. If your kiddo is not into something, or if you're not into something, spend your time elsewhere. There are so many amazing places to study in the world, and places we were surprised about. There were some places we were kind of not as excited to study. And then when we started getting into them, we're like, wow, this was awesome. So, maybe sometimes you got to take a chance when you think maybe it might be something to spark your interest. Or if you're not sure, maybe get a couple books from the library, read them yourself before you plan that week and decide if this is one you want to plunge in on or not. Yeah. But don't beat yourself up if you skip something.
And also that kind of buttresses with that is don't let your knowledge impact what you try to cover in a country. It's like if Italy becomes pasta week and that's all you guys study is pasta.
And your kid's super into it.
And you're like, wait a minute. What about all the art? What about all the history, the Romans, the this, the that?
What about the Renaissance?
And it's like the kid's like, no, it's pasta week at our household, Mom.
We did this. We made pasta. Yeah. We talked about family history. That your family's Italian,
it's
and so
okay,
we got all this history and pasta.
Yeah.
We watched a bunch of videos of Italian grandmas making sauce, and we studied pizza.
It's okay. You're not a bad parent if grandma goes, ooh, what are you studying this week? Ooh, we're in Italy. Oh, I love the art and the Roman history and everything. And the kid's like, I don't know what any of that is. It's just pasta.
Right. Like sometimes your kiddo just gets into some part of it, some aspect. For us in Italy week, it was all about food. She didn't want to do anything but talk about the food and watch videos about the food and make food from scratch. And I got to say, I was happy with this plan because it's Italian food, but that's okay. It's cool if they want to deviate. There were some weeks that she wasn't really into doing the animal research thing. She wasn't very, it was kind of funny in Europe. You're like, they've killed off
all their animals.
Like there's not as many wild spaces in some of these places anymore.
I kid.
In jest. But it was kind of funny because a lot of the animals that are there are similar to the animals we have here. Yeah. Because, for obvious reasons, they were brought over.
And that might be
that
might be a negative when you're doing, staying in the one continent. Now, in some in the continent like in South America, there's a lot of biodiversity.
Oh, sure.
But when you're in Europe and you're just like going from like the Netherlands to Belgium to France, you're like, there ain't that many different animals between the three of these countries,
Yeah, well, right. Or different animals than we have here.
You got to really stretch your way into like the Alps to say, okay, there's some, big
mountain
goats and
right.
stuff there.
Because we did reindeer and stuff. We did Finland. So yeah. It's true. So, there could be some projects and things that your child's
That's what I'm saying is
in
mainland Europe, there's not a lot of large land mammals anymore, other than humans.
There's bears, right?
Yeah, a few. In the mountains, again, you got to stretch into the places where nobody can live in. Yeah.
That's true. So it's okay if you don't cover everything. And going with that as well, follow your learner's rabbit holes, right? Sometimes your kid is super into something, like our kiddo's into pasta and making things from scratch, and we just went with it. We were like, you know what? We're going to abandon all these books that I had got from the library that were about different parts about art. And we were like, we're just going to go with Eden because that's what she wants to do.
And then something that we were stressing on our videos and when we're on our YouTube channel, where we're doing the week by week, we're reviewing everything. We were really trying to talk about this idea of narrowing down your focus when you get to a country or a region to, we were kind of saying like, focus on two things, sometimes it might be
even one thing.
Or one thing. If that country is really known for one thing, go ahead, focus on that. But try to focus on like one or two things, and that can really drive home a theme through the week, or at least get you started. And maybe you end up finding something else that you're really interested in. But like if you have a lot of natural beauty, like for example, if you're in Switzerland, you want to talk about the natural beauty of the mountains and the skiing and the, the winter sports and all this wonderful stuff. And then maybe you also want to talk about food or chocolate or something of that nature. Having two big things that they can remember allows them to carry that information forward and lets that country be memorable. So they can tie an experience or something that they learned to that country.
Right.
I think it helps make it more memorable, whether it's a region or an individual country.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about kindergarten level here. And even if you're doing with an older learner, I think, finding something that you can say, this is what we're really going for this week. It helped our daughter quite a bit. And it kept us from going. Otherwise, you can kind of go everywhere, especially with videos.
We had to do that on the fly. We got at the first, I don't know, we were 6 or 7 weeks in. And I'm like, man, there's a lot to cover. There's a lot to talk about. I don't think she's really she's not remembering anything. And I think once we got into South America, and I think when we hit Brazil, I said, I'm just going to focus on two things, really big things. We're going to do Carnival and we're going to do the rainforest.
Yep.
And we're just going to focus there.
Right. And all the videos we talk about, we're just going to do that.
I just want to focus on those two things, rainforest, natural beauty and animals. And we're going to watch a lot of crazy videos of people dancing. And those two things is what we're going to look about. And we're going to focus on. And that really started to work. And I think we carried that all the way through.
And I think it's good for the learner because they're young. But I think in many ways, this is good for us.
It's easier for us too.
Because otherwise, like you said, we feel like there's a weight on us about wanting to cover more, right? Gosh, I want them to know more about these countries. There's so much to know. Some of these countries, the information available is so deep. There are so many books. We talk about something like the British Isles. Oh my goodness. Talk about books and videos and movies. And there's so much that if you can find a focus, it's so helpful to you because you can be I don't have to worry about these other things. I'm just focusing on these pieces that I really want my kid to take away from this country or region.
Absolutely. Also be cognizant of the glaze on the eyes because you may read a lot of books and you may get a lot more books to read during the week. We kind of ran into this a little bit.
Yeah, where we just got too many books.
Plowing through books.
And partially we did it because we wanted to be able to give you all the best book recommendations. Yeah, right. But sometimes our kiddo was
we started having problems. I think through Africa, there were a lot of countries and regions that tended to have 5 or 6 books written about the same thing. The Jane Goodall was a good example.
Oh yeah.
There were 5 Jane Goodall books. And each one told the same.
Pakistan was all Malala.
Yeah.
All Malala.
Yeah. And then right now in Antarctica, we read 3 books on Shackleton's journey, which, top 10, adventure stories of all time because they did not die. Thanks Dickens. So they tend to they batch some, in some regions, they batch a lot of stories. So you could just, if you get 3 or 4 books, I did this a few times where I read the same story and my daughter's like, Dad, we've read this a few times now.
Right.
We need to move on.
So in our videos, we usually will show these are 3 different books all about the same topic. This was the best one, or pick any of them. Mm-hmm. But, you might not want to pick a bunch of repeat. Again, we read more for you guys. We did this all for you. But, be aware if your learner's just not into it, you maybe you pulled in too many books and you want to pare it down for the following weeks.
Also adding in media. This is something, you did a lot of the heavy lifting on the literature because you like to read at night with them, and then the movies as well. And I did a lot of the media on the videos, and we kind of paired the two together. I think that helps to make a lot more connections. Mm-hmm. I think, seeing people doing things, watching people say things, I think it's just, it's something they can relate to. Right. At a level that I think is a little bit beyond just these little, these children's books. I think seeing people doing, living, and experiencing is, I think, way more impactful than a short book.
Yeah, the videos and the movies I think really stuck with them. We tried to find
a lot of documentaries too.
We did a lot of documentaries. We tried to find a movie that we could watch that was kid appropriate for every country region, and we weren't always successful. But most of the time we found something to watch that they could get into, and I think that they really took a lot away from that.
Absolutely. So let's get into what we would do the next time around when you come around this again. And then we know there's some families out there that might be doing this, and then they know, okay, we're going to come back and we're going to revisit this with a younger learner, but then with our older kid, we're actually going to fold them back in. And that's kind of something that we're planning
That's
on doing.
exactly what we're going to do. Our younger daughter is 3, our older is 6.5, when our younger is 5, when we think she can handle it. Our older will be 8.5 at that point, and we're going to do this again. And at that point, we're going to try to get the girls in lockstep on the same level.
And we're gonna focus on lifting up some of the content, maybe even pulling in that Torchlight, the journaling aspect.
Yes,
Because she'll be old enough to do that.
We're going to pull in Torchlight Trek for our older daughter. Yeah.
So we're going to lift up the books, have some spines, and maybe even have our older daughter start to read some of those stories.
Yeah.
That's what I like to call division of labor in education. Having that older kid actually do all the education, and you're just kind of this overseer. I'm the administrator.
We enjoy the picture books so much. I enjoyed them as an adult. I think our 8.5-year-old will definitely enjoy them, when she's that age. I think that it's easier to make these levels harder. It is hard to make these levels easier. Again, build your library. I think you could definitely do with, 4 if you had to. There might be some stuff that's over their head. Torchlight, absolutely not. So what we're going to do the next time, we are going to do build your library. We are going to toss out the Torchlight, curriculum, most of it. We're going to take our favorite books from Torchlight and we will sprinkle them in. So basically, we're going to do the Build Your Library framework. We're going to bring in the books from Torchlight. And most notably, we found a lot of books that we loved that weren't in either curriculum, by the way, that you can find in our YouTube videos. And we will pull in our favorite books from this time around, and we will watch our favorite movies and the things that we really enjoyed. And what we're going to do is we're going to spend more time on the areas that we loved, like, the British Isles, Italy, China. There were some countries, Brazil, Mexico. We loved those. There was so much good. There was so much food and culture and cool things to study about, and our kids really got into it. We're going to stretch those out, and we are going to bundle some other regions together that, maybe just weren't quite as interesting to us this time around. And we're just going to be okay with that. We'll have our older learner read a book or look at that area so that she's more familiar, because she'll be a little bit older. But we're gonna just use the Build Your Library framework and bring in the best books from Torchlight and ourselves, and lengthen weeks where our personal family interests lie. So that's how we're going to approach this the next time around. And we're not going to be afraid to make some skips. So I'd like to do this in I want to do this in 50 weeks next time. This plan was a bit long.
I think it's very doable to prune off about 20 weeks of time. Those overview weeks, I don't know if we'll do those as much.
And I don't know. I like the overview weeks, but you're right. You could do just overview couple of days. You don't have to do a week on it.
You do like 1 or 2 days on it anyway. So, I think there's a couple of regions where they can be kind of crunched down. And you can pick like the most notable country of that region. There's some regions where there's like 5 or 6 countries and they're all very similar. And then just pick the one that is, whether it's like geopolitically most important or, something that the kid may know in the news. Or if you see a region and inside that region because you've gone through this before, or if you're going through it the first time and there's something really cool in that area, that might be the thing you jump on. Like, for example, if you're like in the Middle East and your kid really loves Egypt, you just might say, okay, we're going to focus on Egypt. We'll touch a little bit on the other countries, but we'll really focus on Egypt. That was kind of our flow towards the end, where we were just saying, well, there's a lot of countries here. There's not a lot of content. I'm going to pick one that's really good and then kind of pick something that kind of touches all of them. That's why we kind of stress the ecosystem. If there's something novel there, like, for example, the Sahara. If you're doing North Africa, you're just going to do the Sahara and then maybe some other aspect of the region. Maybe like, whatever. If it's Egypt and you want to do Egyptian history, and then the Sahara for the most, you'll touch all those countries in some way, right? That type of philosophy. If you're doing something in like, say, South America, like with the Andes, you might touch Chile, Ecuador, and Peru all as one, and just kind of do like an Andes thing, right? And kind of like approach it in that manner.
Right.
where
We
you
might
bundle-
we might do things more regionally and
Yeah.
less country specific. Because you're right. Like maybe the next time around we would say we're going to do South America. We're going to study the Amazon,
Yeah.
and we're going to in that fold in all the countries that have
Yeah.
that are part of the Amazon. But we're
That's-
not going to study all the countries
Yeah,
individually.
the Amazon and the Sahara are great examples of that, where like the Amazon we always associate with like Brazil, but Colombia, Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, they all the half of their country is in the Amazon, right?
Right.
So like you could touch a whole swath of countries with respect to that, and then maybe touch on a few others that are interesting.
And I like that idea of saying, "Oh, okay, we're gonna study the Amazon for 2 weeks, or we're gonna study the Andes
Eastern
for a week."
Europe's another good example of that, right? Like I have some heritage from Hungary, right? And we may focus on that because that's okay. That's my heritage, right? And kind of group the other countries as kind of like, okay, and these are also in this region. Now they're all very culturally different, but we're going to focus on this one, right? That type of thing.
Right. So that's our plan for the next time around. Use Build Your Library and then add additional weeks to countries we're really interested in, and maybe, skip or reduce some things that we aren't as interested in to, make it a more enjoyable time all the way around for us. But
Absolutely.
whatever plan you do, whether you do Build Your Library, whether you do Torchlight, whether you combine them, or you do some amalgamation, or you do Build Your Library as a base, add in Torchlight books, whatever you want to do, I think we can agree this was really an incredible time. And we are being picky.
Yeah.
We are really being picky. I think either of these curriculums is totally fine.
Totally fine.
If you're like, you love with the Torchlight book list and you just really want to do that, man, go for it.
Do it.
I think that's fine. They're both great. We're just trying to be really in the weeds and comprehensive for you if you're not sure what to pick or you really want
this was
the
lot.
nitty gritty.
And I'm not going to lie. If you choose any of the curriculums or even if you bundle it, it's a lot of work. It's a lot to go through. This is not just getting a workbook for like the math curriculum,
true.
right? This is way more than say, okay, here we are, we're going to do first grade math, or here we are, we're going to do, explode the code or Singapore math or whatever it might be, or logic of English. This is an intense thing that you're going to be spending a lot of time on. Not too much time, but it's going to be this dominating thing. Yeah, it's a huge commitment.
It's a commitment, but I think on the time, and this is a good thing to add, if you follow the curriculum as written,
it's not a lot of time.
It's not a lot of time. It really isn't.
You might spend as much as you spend doing math and English every day as you do on that curriculum. Maybe
probably less. I mean, you're talking about
depends on how much media you want to do, and like if you think about it,
if you do it as written, that's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
You can go from as written, which is you're going to read like one picture book, a chapter a night from a chapter book. You're going to read a couple of pages from 5 spines, like 2 pages from 5 spines. You're going to do one art project and you're going to do a recipe. Like that's it, right? So if you wanted to just do this as written, because maybe you've got a lot going on, you're at a co-op, you've got other things.
You've got a lot of kids.
You got a lot of kids and you're like, hey, I don't have time to expand this thing. If you just want to do the curriculum as written, this is totally doable. It is not a lot of time. It's only a handful of hours a week. But if you can expand it
to whatever you want it to be.
That's the thing. It's like a goldfish. It grows to the size of the bowl. So you can, if you give this more time, there is always more you can add. And for us, this was a pretty dominant part of the last year and a half of our lives. And we wanted more media and we wanted more books because our daughter is voracious for, reading. And so she just wants more. And so we did that for her. But this doesn't have to be your experience. You do not have to go to this level that we went to. It's just so you know, you can be crazy like us, or you can just go with it as written and take the easier path.
Like us.
Yeah. So I don't want anyone to think that it is this mountain of work.
No.
Because it really isn't. But you can make it so.
You can make it a
and
lot.
it was oftentimes it was a fun mountain of work. I mean, let's be honest. When we did, I keep going back to the British Isles because I think that was my favorite.
I tell you what,
we had like a movie every other night. We were reading all these great
eating
books.
good food. If you lay out
amazing food.
If you lay out your daily schedule, I'm telling you what, you got math, you got reading, and you got your curriculum, whatever it might be, your literature curriculum. I tell you what, the easiest one to go for is this. Is the around the world journey.
Oh, it was always fun.
You're doing fun things. You're watching cool things. You're reading fun things.
You're cooking good food.
We all know, listening to this, you got you got either math or reading. That's one of them's a tornado that you're walking into every single time.
Maybe your student loves them both.
Oh, yes. Maybe they do. But we all know there's at least one of those your kid probably doesn't really like very much, or that's a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, that's
the one
more
you
like it.
The one you kind of dread every day. You're like, oh God, I got to do that. This is not that one, right? Doing the around the world study
always fun.
is always the fun thing. It's always the easy thing. So even if it is a little bit more work, or you make it a little bit more work, it's always the fun thing to do that week. Like I've never saw my kid go, oh, Dad, we have to watch a kids movie, or we have
to cook a recipe from this country.
Yeah.
She's
Never
always into it.
Never had that.
Yeah, it is something that our kids have really looked forward to.
Yeah.
Our younger daughter has learned how to sit through chapter and picture books because of this curriculum.
The little one now, I swear she has watched enough of this. She's starting to sit down and let you read to her.
Yep.
And she'll let you read.
She wants to be a part of it.
I read that Shackleton book with that little one next to me today. And that was not a short Shackleton book. And she sat there the whole time and she was asking questions and she liked it. And so, it does teach that kind of, it teaches that patience, allows you to be a better listener and enjoy that. Speaking of which, this was a long podcast. We want to end it the way we always want to end it, on something we like.
What are we into?
Talking about listening to things. Let's talk about the Libby app. There are two apps that tend to work with libraries. That one is Overdrive, and the other one is Libby. I've been using Overdrive. I know our library system is now asking you to use Libby for some reason. So I have been trying to get more audiobooks into the older one. She enjoys doing her quiet time. She enjoys doing her Lego and doing activities and art and whatnot while she listens to an audiobook. She's been chewing through the Nicholas Flamel books, the immortal Nicholas Flamel. It is very funny to listen to your 6.5-year-old read 300-page books all by herself, in audio form. Listen to them. Now, I consider audiobooks reading. Some people will disagree with that out there, but I am a big audiobook fan now. Not just for my kid, but also personally. But she chews through it, and for her to start telling you this elaborate story that she's listening to is really funny. But the Libby app is something that we've been using a lot on our iPad, so that's what she uses for doing that. She knows how to log in. She can open it. She can select her book. She can hit the play button. She knows how to use it. She's been really enjoying it. You're able to sync it to your account, so you can actually watch. Our accounts are kind of blended together, me and my daughter's. So I know when there's a book that's come in or a new audio book, so I can go ahead and download that for her. Really, really user-friendly, really, really easy to use. Haven't had any problems with like anything crashing or anything failing. So if you are looking for an app, and I think it's can work on both your tablets and also your phones, to listen or to read ebooks, especially if you're trying to check out books for your around the world journey. And if you wanted to, read them on your phone or on a tablet or even on your Kindle, you can easily use your Libby app or your Overdrive app. We've been using Libby a lot more lately, and that has been really helpful. She has liked it. So if you're looking to get into audiobooks, if you're looking to, connect to your library, there's a lot of awesome resources, and the Libby app, I can recommend it. We've been using a lot of it. I use personally the Overdrive app on mine, but that's because that was what I always thought they used, and I've been using it. It works just fine on our library.
They both work good.
But the library now, I see this banner up at the top. If you'd like to do things, use the Libby app. So I don't know if they're moving in that direction away from Overdrive.
I think they both work well. Just the concept of getting audiobooks from your library and using them in an app-based format rather than just getting them on CD. It's been very convenient for us. Very convenient, way easy to use. So anyway, go out there, check out the Libby app, connect to your library, get your kid listening to audiobooks. It's a lot of fun, and it takes a little bit of the load off of you. That's right. So this was a super long episode. Thanks for staying with us. Yeah. Thank you for journeying with us around the world. It's been a long year and a half. We are super excited to be getting into. We're going to do a 1-month Harry Potter unit study, which we will do a show on. You hear that, guys? I'm off the clock for 30 days. And then we are going to be starting right into prehistory with Build Your Library and Blossom and Root combination. We're going to combo another curriculum. So we'll talk a lot about more stuff to come, but thanks for staying with us. We hope that this was helpful. And I just want to say personally, of course, I'll send anybody the schedule, as I said earlier, but also if you have any questions or you're thinking about doing something different with this combination, I have lived and breathed. We both have these two pieces of curriculum for the last year and a half, longer because of all the planning we did. Reach out.
Yes.
I'm happy to help you if you're like, I'm not sure about this, or what do you think about that? Or I was thinking about this, or I'm thinking about switching continents around, or like, I am more than happy to help. Just shoot us an email, and I'm happy to help you guys figure out the right thing for your family.
And you can absolutely make this what you want it to be. It's a very adaptive curriculum, whether you choose the one or the other or both of them together. It's something you can adapt to any style, any structure. We've talked to some people who have started it and they had to stop it, and they're going to start it back up, and it's going to go for 10 more years, that type of thing. But it's a great curriculum. We've really enjoyed it.
I think you can absolutely do it. Some people say, I've got an 8 and 10-year-old, should I do this? It's like, yes. Sure. I think that this is great for even older kids. This is really terrific for multi-ages, because you can always find something more difficult or, more age appropriate on any of these countries or any of the topics within these countries.
There's a lot of curriculums that these, the Torchlights and the Build Your Libraries have that have a lot of themes, early history and all this stuff. But I don't think there's a more important theme than learning about other people around the world.
Yeah, I agree.
Expanding your horizons, seeing other cultures, experiencing what other people experience. I don't think there's a more important curriculum, especially for these early years, than our touring the world. So if you got a 4-year-old, 8-year-old, whatever it is, I think it's a great curriculum. You can adapt it up and you can adapt it, some of them down. But really, I don't know if there's a better and more important thing for these young kids to learn than to know that it's a big world out there and they can be part of it.
Right. And Build Your Library does have a around the world geography for 7th grade. So if you have a learner that's pretty close to that age that you want to do maybe with this, you might consider buying level 7 and this one together, and 7 will give you some books for your older learner to do, or if you have a younger learner that's reading at an older level, that kind of thing. So know that there is another level in the Build Your Library track that also does this for older learners too. But we've had a great time, so thanks. And if you're about to embark on this journey, enjoy the journey.
Hold on to your pants and check out our YouTube channel. It'll help you out, and our resource guides. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time.
Happy homeschooling!